Now, the UFC slash MMA will never be seen as a real sport. I mean, ask any person face to face who doesn't indulge in it. They'll usually say it isn't a real sport, or at least something harsh about it. And nowadays, they probably have a good standpoint to do so. For the most part, the UFC slash MMA has always been a degenerate community, the fighters included. I mean, just look at former champion Sean Strickland. Viral clips of him saying outrageous things would obviously result in major backlash online, whether you agree with him or not, and he definitely has sparked a bad look on the UFC multiple times. Usually, viral clips of the UFC involve a speech by a UFC fighter, whether that would be in a press conference or a post-fight interview with Joe Rogan. And believe it or not, these clips actually have a huge impact on reaching those who don't even watch the UFC, and since it basically gives a first impression on what it's all about. This mass popularity with clips online has been proven to work with uprising fighters like Khamzat Chimaev, which is how he got hyped up by casuals by clips I'm pretty sure everyone's heard of.
Everybody, I come here for everybody, kill everybody, I'm the champ, I'm the king!
99% of the fights in MMA organizations, including the UFC sometimes, at the lower level also look degenerate, simply because sheer skill and techniques at the lower level pretty much vanishes, specifically in their striking. And because of this, fights look more like street fight brawls, since the only punches thrown literally just look like wild haymakers. On certain occasions, this can also be seen in the UFC at the top level. A perfect example of this is guys like Conor McGregor, who got promoted tremendously just because of his loudmouth and trash talking. And although you could argue that he actually has skill in his striking, this isn't the case for everybody who got promoted from lower ranks this way. When it comes to this topic, forums online pretty much always say MMA is just as much of a sport as boxing or wrestling. However, this isn't actually the case if we look at it more closely. Boxing and wrestling are more well-rounded sports, and this simply comes down to only having to master one skill, in this case, the art of punching or the art of grappling. However, in MMA, you have to learn however many martial arts, usually it's 3 or more, and because of this, you can never be fully proficient in one specifically. Even though fighters might have a solid base in something before entering the UFC, their base will actually be limited and look sloppy as well. For example, if a fighter specializes in Muay Thai and enters the UFC, they always have to worry about something like a takedown because of their square stance. And because of this, they'll probably have to switch it or throw less techniques that would normally be thrown in their sport. P.S. I train in Muay Thai, so hopefully that makes sense. The pay difference is also huge between boxing and the UFC, which just shows which of the two is actually more organized. Rules need to be established for UFC fighters' contracts, since boxers get much better promotion deals and make up to 50% of their total revenue from their events, whereas UFC fighters only get a small 16%. And although Dana White might not have total control over this, I find it quite hypocritical that he preaches you need to have the courage and heart to step in the cage and risk your life, when UFC fighters' salaries are looking like this. Overall, if we look at most other sports, none really match how degenerate the UFC can be at times, including boxing slash kickboxing or even Muay Thai for the sport part. The same also goes with the fight pay. Another thing is, we can't really control which fighter gets to say what in their events since it's free speech and all, but technically Dana White contradicted himself with the free speech part, since he basically decides what people should say sometimes, including religion, like we've seen before.
It wasn't controversial at all, but the reality is this: you just won the biggest fight of your career, you know? America doesn't want to hear your thoughts on Jesus, and, you know, keep that stuff at home. Religion, politics, all that stuff.
And lastly, although I bet some of you don't mind or even like the bloody street fight brawls, what does that really say about you as a person?